think I mean, the dream job, like, halfway through school was to, like, work at an LGBT publication, like The Advocate, or, like, you know, Windy City, if they had, like, a large staff or anything like that. And then freelancing and interning for a lot of these publications, I realized that it wasn't necessarily sustainable in the moment that it is right now. And I was terrified of it, and terrified of the field changing and of journalism in general. So of course I went to the very stable and steady world of nonprofits. That was a good decision. But towards the end of journalism school, honestly, I got frustrated because so much journalism didn't want me to be myself. And if I reported on a queer story, it was like, well, make sure it's not too gay because it has to be mainstream friendly. And like, well, you're gay, so maybe you're not the right person because you're gonna be biased. Like, the question of bias in media is the worst thing ever. And like the Equal Media project that we did, that was one of the huge issues that we had to deal with, people asking about. So towards the end of J school, I mean, I wouldn't change a thing. I would still go through Medill again if, like, given the option of what to do with the career I'm in now. But it just got really frustrating to think that I had to be writing, you know, for this other audience that couldn't include me. Like, I wanted my voice to come through. I wanted to write for a cause. So in nonprofits where it's straight up advocacy, right? Like, I wanted to be an advocate through journalism, and I could not find a lot of traditional journalism routes that allowed that opportunity.
So for me, it was, again, a game of figuring out if the work I was doing was going to fit somewhere. Because the way I saw it, as I said, you know, when I came to Northwestern as an undergrad in 2008, I was pretty disillusioned by journalism, to be honest. And a lot of that came from, you know, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I'm from the city. So more often than not, when I watched television or I read the news, it was always Black negative. It was always LGBT negative. I didn't really feel as though the communities I came from were being represented in a way that was as authentic or had the same shred of dignity or respect as, you know, our more privileged counterparts in both of those contexts. But for me, it came to a head when, as I was entering in 2008, and this is after I've been with the Baim for America, starting Northwestern, Prop 8 happens, we get the gays and the Black discussion. So for me, it's like, great, so Black journalism, LGBT journalism, don't see me. So am I invisible to the industry, is what I thought. And at the time, yes, I think, you know, queer people of color were not on the radar. And I think that was the beauty of that fallout, is that we were able to take that moment and say, hey, we're here to help build a bridge if you allow us to help lead the way and listen to us. And I sat back uncomfortably watching that discussion because I didn't know quite how to make sense of it or how that would translate to my career. But it took a few years for me to understand that I would be part of a generation, and certainly with these folks and many of you, that are helping chart new territory, and we're shuffling our feet along the way to figure this out in our own newsrooms, regardless of whether or not we're writing about LGBT stuff all the time, or we're writing about a lot of stories and LGBT may come up once or twice every week. So for me, I have to take solace in the fact that what I'm doing has value and be able to go to a mainstream pub and say, hey, this is what I'm able to bring you. If you want to have responsible coverage of this community, I'm your person. And being able to be confident in that.
Yeah, so you both sort of talked about the frustration of knowing what you want to do and not really knowing where that fits in. I mean, that's what I've spent the last year doing. Right after graduation, I started working at Chicago Magazine here in Chicago. I loved it. It was a great job. I loved working with those people, but inherently it's not queer. It's not like I wrote about pride and write about gay bars, but it's not the type of coverage that really gets me pumped up and that I want to do passionately. But there's nowhere to do that. Like, there's all my favorite queer publications, I know the people that make them, they don't have the money to pay me. And as a young working journalist, I have to work to make money to live, to support myself. So I've sort of struggled with that need to make money and survive and support myself, with also my very important emotional, psychological need to be working in queer journalism. The website that I write for, Autostraddle, I started and they didn't pay me, and I undertook it as a labor of love because the site was really important to me. It was where, I mean, I feel like if you go to a website and you read it every single day and you read 99% of their content, it doesn't make sense to not contribute to them if you can. So that's why I started. Now they're able to pay a little bit, not a lot, But I've seen that pay off. You know, I feel I can tell someone like I work for a website and they take me seriously because I make money and whatever. But at the same time, I'm freelancing for things that are not inherently queer, and I'm doing a lot of other stuff trying to cobble it together because there aren't really that many, you know, the places that all my friends that graduated journalism school with me are going and working, most of them aren't queer places, and I could do those jobs and I would be very good at them, I believe, and I would have a good time, but it wouldn't be what I'm driven to do, and until I find that job that is what I'm driven to do that is inherently queer, I'm gonna be cobbling it together, because to me it's just not satisfying to do it any other way.
So I think that we've sort of gone on a few different threads here, so I'm gonna throw out a couple of ideas to you guys and just sort of feel free to respond to any or all of them however you feel. So I think part of what I heard from you before is talking about doing queer work, but not necessarily at a queer publication. So, like, how much of that is appropriate, and how do you sort of get to do work that you're passionate if you're working at a place that isn't LGBT specific? And then along with that, like, how do you balance sort of small, like, working and doing work that you're passionate at a small LGBT publication, and maybe they won't be able to pay you? And I guess sort of wrapped in with that is the idea of internships. Like, I think internships have been a big component for all of us in sort of getting experience onto our resume. But how do we balance sort of being able to support ourselves in the work that we want to do, while also like having to go out and earn a living and like make it a practical decision?
Well, so I will say that as a contributing editor for Auto Shuttle, it's an unpaid position. They advertise it as that. But I got it because I had paid internships that were not related to LGBT issues. Because, I mean, people still want trained reporters and writers and people that know what they're doing. So I think everyone that wants to be a journalist should go get internships and practice writing. I don't think that most people should work for free. I know that it's not always possible to get paid, but obviously you always want to. Even as a student, some people say, oh, you have to pay your dues or whatever. No, you can do it. You can find paid internships. It's competitive, but I think it's worth the effort to make sure that you're never, so that you don't get used to underselling yourself. What was I going to say? Internships. What was the other part of the question?
Internships, and then also like more generally working for free and doing queer work in
okay.
that queer place.
Yeah, queer in the mainstream.
Yeah.
Queer in the traditional.
Sorry, I wrapped a lot of things
It's
into
okay.
that question. So
I actually get excited about that. I think that's really fun to be like the token queer person at a straight publication, not a straight publication, but a publication that's mostly staffed by older, straight, white people that are like, they'll think it's an interesting story if you pitch it, but they would never think of it organically, because it gives you an edge as just someone that's coming up with stories they haven't heard before. You oftentimes, in my experience at least, you have a little more leeway to shape the story yourself because they don't know enough about it to curtail you and to reel you in, which can be fun. It can also be hard when you need guidance and editors and really know how to do that. But I think it's really important if you're an LGBT person in any job to try and make sure that perspective is shown, just as it's important, to bring stories of color and other things like that. So.
Yeah, so there's a lot here. So first I want to address the idea of, doing work, in a mainstream context. And again, I think this is where, a lot of us who we see our peers or we look at, the job market and we see a lot of the work really is in a more mainstream context. And then you have the question of, do I want to write about, guy on the street who, just robbed somebody? Do I want to write about some nice festival in the park, or do I want to write about the protest that just happened for, for marriage equality in a state, and having to strike that balance and figuring out, okay, how much of, the issues I care about, am I willing to take into my work, or how much of that am I willing to give up to have a stable income? Those are questions I had to ask myself as I was searching for fellowships. Before I was hired on at Mike, which at the time was Policy Mike, and that was a question that was really helpful for me to have to ask myself, because I was like, I've written for 3 years almost exclusively about race, gender, sexuality as they relate to culture and politics. So do I leave that aside to make a living and then do freelance stuff on the side, or do I do this exclusively and commit to that? So that was the tension I had for a bit, and for me, I'm happy that I was able to find a position where I work, that any section we don't, like I said earlier, everything is there in terms of, a lot of various identity issues, LGBT being one of them, but it also helps when I was interviewing that I could look up my hierarchy, and my editor is openly lesbian Christian. At the time, managing editor was an openly trans man. So I knew that I would not have to worry about being seen as too LGBT or not LGBT enough, because that was going to be part of it. But of course, we were thinking, yes, that, but also think beyond, because there are other touch points. But one of the things I loved about my fellowship, and one of the things I love about my company, is that the contributors are paid, and fellows were paid a living wage. So I could actually, and I come from a, before college, I came from a really comfortable background. Economic situation changed, so I was low income all of college and relied on scholarships. So for me, a lot of my peers could afford to, support themselves taking fellowships or internships at bigger name places to get their foot in the door, and I had to look on and kind of say, well, I can't do that, so I interned in politics or in corporate during college, where I could actually get paid for the work I was doing and live and support myself. So for me, as I was searching for fellowships this spring, I got really disillusioned, because I was going through the list and saying, I can't take that because I have to crowdsource heavily my my ability to live. So I think where possible, publications with robust staffs and budgets need to be paying a living wage, not $5, $8, $10 an hour. Pay people. It's wage theft at this point. Young people who are leading the way in these discussions deserve to be paid like anybody else for the work they do, because they're adding value.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think it's also really interesting because the media landscape right now, and I will say in the last year, things have changed, I think, fairly rapidly in terms of representation of LGBT voices online, and trans voices and voices of color. I think that people have suddenly woken up, not in a revolutionary way, but I think we're starting to see slow changes. So it's difficult, and it's kind of a big tease, because we see all these people who are really great voices who we respect, like BuzzFeed for the crap you give it for all the GIF sets. BuzzFeed has some really thoughtful LGBT content, and so does Slate and so on, and all these other kind of more startup-y news sites. So we know that those things are out there and those voices are in demand, but they don't pay people like us because we're fresh out of school, and we're not big names yet. Our bylines are not clickbait just yet. So it's it's weird. There's this cognitive dissonance, because I know that there is a place where I can do that work and it will be welcomed into the world, but there is a sense of Kaitlyn was saying, paying your dues, which might be covering the pet parade for your local newspaper, which you don't necessarily want to do, even if you're going to have to do it to pay your dues and work your way up to the star BuzzFeed contributor that everybody goes to when they want an opinion of marriage equality or something. So.
So part of this obviously is to talk or tell professionals what we think they should be doing for us. So if you were if you were looking for a new job, what would you be looking for in a place that you wanted to work, where you would feel supported? What sort of stuff do you think is important for employers to do, that people who are going to come and do passionate work for them, this is what the employer should be giving back?
Well, a thing that, obviously I just moved to New York to look for work, so I'm doing this every day, and I get asked a lot of times okay, so what is your ideal publication that you want to work for, and what would your dream job be? And it's hard, because my answer is I would write for the website I'm writing for, but I would be full-time and they would be able to pay me, and I know that's not possible. So that's really that's frustrating, because I have an answer, but it's not a satisfying answer. It doesn't help anybody. I think maybe, I don't know, it's hard. There are entry-level jobs in a lot of places, but those are the places that have enough money to pay more than just their seasoned staffers, and those places are more than likely not LGBT specific, and that's just sort of an industry-wide problem.
I'll say this really quickly. One of the things before starting my master's, the last time I spent a year working in corporate communications for Commonwealth Edison here in Chicago, the state's utility company. One of the things that our CEO at the time, who's the first woman CEO hired, was saying that she went around and toured at a lot of our statewide company locations, and staffing those speeches. She was quoting one writer that she recently her talk about like companies and how they, manage people, and the quote that resonated with me was culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's something that for me, as I looked at any job, culture matters. So culture would include how you treat your writers. Are you paying them? Are you making it mutually beneficial in terms of compensation for your permanent staff? Is your place diverse, not just diverse in having the spaces in the space, but also inclusive of those perspectives and voices and seeing those people's value added? Is there equity? Are there people who come from different communities and experiences on the parity in terms of power? So I'm looking at the director level, I'm looking at executives. How many of those people of color? How many of those are LGBT? How many of those are women? I'm looking at that when I'm looking at a place. And honestly, for me, and what I've learned about myself going into the job search process, if I have to choose between two equal companies, one may, I will choose the one that I see it appears to be more welcoming to somebody like me. Because I think, it's one thing to take a paycheck and go home and have a big name on the resume, wonderful. But am I gonna feel great about that if I feel like I'm being pushed to the fringe? Hell no, I'm not, just to be honest. So I feel that culture, number one for me, I would say.
Yeah, I echo that totally. I think having out colleagues is so important, and feeling like even if you don't have an LGBT story like in your magazine like that week or that month, knowing that you could pitch it and have someone to talk to about it who would like know what's up and be informed about the movement, and like Derrick was saying, in terms of gender diversity, racial diversity, that stuff is also important. But also LGBT diversity is something that you can't tell by looking at somebody, obviously. So if I go in for an interview and I say that I've done queer stuff on my resume, I want someone to tell me like, oh, that's really cool, and not necessarily out themselves in the interview, but like strike up a conversation about it, and let me know that there is some significance that matters on that staff. And diversity on all accounts. Like I am right now the only woman in my department where I work, because we're undergoing some like structural changes. So hopefully that'll change at some point soon. But just that one little thing, I'm at an LGBT organization, and thankfully a lot of the people there are LGBT. But even that one little nuance has made it significantly less comfortable for me to just like speak up in a department meeting, because I look around and like, oh, there's like 4 men in this room, and then it's just little old me. So making sure there are people who are vocal about who they are and unapologetic about it, and like knowing that it's like safe to be that way at work.
So I guess like